We have a number of questions that have come in, and I realize that there may be more questions in light of some of the changes that have happened this week, so we can certainly talk through those as well. I'm Winnie, if I don't personally know you. I used to be a wedding planner, and now I run the Creatives Council, which is affordable, approachable legal work for small businesses. We work with a few hundred people in the wedding industry and are very familiar with your businesses, with how events work, with the clientele that you work with, and kind of what the issues facing the industry are. Today, we are, Beth and I'm going to let Beth introduce herself as well here, but Beth and I are joining together to offer a platform for you to be able to ask questions regarding to the legal and accounting side of your businesses, because that is a rapidly changing area, especially in light of everything that is going on with COVID. So I will turn it over to Beth, and then after that, we can dive into questions.
Hi, everybody. As Annie said, my name is Beth. I'm your tax lady for the day. I'm a CPA, originally from Minneapolis, but I actually work from and live in Berlin, Germany now. I've been here for about 3 years. I still contract and work very closely with Fox Tax, who have been supporting the self-employed creative entrepreneurials of the Twin Cities and beyond for the past decade or so. Folks just like yourselves are very much our bread and butter, and we've been up to our necks with constantly changing legislation surrounding all the COVID-related disaster recovery loans and tax credits, and all the while 2019 taxes and the deadline around the corner. So it's been a little bit of a crazy year for everybody, but it's been an interesting one for us tax accountants too. But thanks for having me.
Wonderful. All right. So we have the questions that you guys have pre-submitted, but of course, please feel free to submit other questions as well through the chat box in Zoom. And then the wonderful Mary Catherine over at Kohler is going to kind of throw the questions to Beth and I, and then we can go from there. And if we ad lib a little bit, that's okay as well. So, all right, Mary Catherine, I'll let you take it away.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. The first question we have, I'm pretty sure is for Beth. This is, I don't have a state, so we're just going to guess it's Minnesota. She's looking to expand her services into selling some small products. Tax-wise for physical products, is there a good platform/software that can easily track sales tax and the processing of it? She's hesitant to step into that world because it looks too complicated.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you can raise your hand or something if this is your question, because sales tax is
it's
a really
Kristen's question.
I'll talk to it really briefly because it's recorded and maybe she can catch it later. But sales tax is something I could spend hours on alone. If anyone has ever had to deal with their own point of sales or direct customer sales, non-wholesale, non-service-based sales, you can relate that sales tax is pretty complicated, and multi-state sales tax even more so. So general rule of thumb is most states will charge sales tax on tangible personal property. So personal property just means it's not real estate, real property. State by state, the rules are very, very different. Some states don't even have a sales tax. In terms of platforms, there's two really good ones. One is called TaxJar, and one is called Avalara, A-V-A-L-A-R-A. Both have a lot of really good information right on their website that you can look at on a state-by-state basis, including sales thresholds, transaction thresholds that you have to hit before you have to even worry about sales tax. And I mean, they're pretty high thresholds, $100,000, $200,000 of sales, 100, 200 individual transactions. If you're nearing those levels, then yeah, I would recommend employing a service like this that can monitor your sales automatically. They link up with Shopify and other point of sale softwares to kind of They like scrub your invoice. They kind of compare it against their database. Is this a taxable sale? Are you taxable in this state? And then they'll add sales tax to the invoice and kind of send it out to your customer. So that's how it works in a nutshell. But definitely a good thing to be aware of if you are selling in other states, that they do have new rules called economic nexus rules. So historically, you had to have a physical presence in a state to care about sales tax. Now, just doing enough business in another state triggers sometimes sales and income tax nexus. So I'll leave it there for now. That person can get in touch with me if you've got more specific questions as a follow-up, or is anybody else here want to hear more about sales tax before we close that? No? Okay, great. I think we can move on.
Beth, I do think maybe one question that may or may not pertain to people depending on what type of floral services they offer. But let's say that somebody is providing a floral service of some sort for a client who's located across a border. So let's say that you buy all of your floral at Kohler. That's where you have your wholesale account. Let's say you buy, whatever, $3,000 in floral, and you're charging your client, $10,000 for the floral and the services. You're paying Kohler in Minnesota, obviously, because they're located here. And maybe you live in Minnesota, but your services where you are actually delivering the floral to and setting it up are in Wisconsin. And so does that have any effect on sale reporting for taxes?
It does, yeah, and it's a really good question. Again, state by state, they've got different rules on where the sales tax is triggered. Is it a source destination, or source or destination state? So most states, including Minnesota and I believe Wisconsin, are destinations. So you're going to look at the shipping address or where the service or goods are going to transfer ownership. That's where the sales tax kind of is triggered. So if you are a Minnesota-based business and shipping out of state, then unless you already have triggered nexus in Wisconsin, you wouldn't have to worry about Minnesota sales tax for that state sales. You may have to worry about Wisconsin sales tax. Kind of, again, depending, do you have enough connection with with Wisconsin in particular, or any other state to have to register for sales tax there and then charge Wisconsin sales tax. So very case by case basis on that one.
And would you report that both in Wisconsin as well as Minnesota, or?
As far as sales tax goes, it's very transactional. So you would only owe it to one state, or you're only going to collect sales tax on behalf of one state. Just like in Minnesota, technically you collect on behalf of different counties, depending on where you're shipping or where the wedding or event is taking place. So yeah, in this case, you would not owe the tax to both Minnesota and Wisconsin. It would just be Wisconsin in the case that you did have to collect for Wisconsin. I'd say most small businesses, unless you have like a shop in Wisconsin and Minnesota, most of my clients who are in the industry are not registered in both states. They're Minnesota businesses. They're not worrying about Wisconsin sales tax for the most part. If you were doing a lot of deliveries, if you're doing a lot of events in Wisconsin, you're probably going to want to look at whether you're exposing yourself to liability essentially by not collecting the tax from your customers. And then if the Department of Revenue finds out, they're going to come to you for that tax. So you'll want to assess how much business you're doing in the state. Again, have you triggered nexus? And then go from there.
Perfect.
Great. That was a lot of really great information. I know that we do have some people who shops in Hudson and shops in Stillwater, and I know that it's pretty easy to just, do business between both Wisconsin and Minnesota. So thank you for covering that topic.
I could share a little story for you. Many years ago, I did an event in New York City. The first wedding I ever did was for my daughter, who got married in Manhattan. And so I had referrals from artists to get me to a sales rep there. And we thought we needed to be registered in the state of New York in order to buy wholesale and not pay taxes. When I actually got there, I found out that, this particular wholesaler would not mind a bit charging us the tax. And I said, no, we're a business. We want to avoid paying the tax. Well, it turned out in the end, we forgot the deadline for paying that tax in New York, and the penalty was way more than if I had just bought them, paid the tax on the spot, and let it go at that. So anyway, you might want to consider your options. I mean, I was only doing the one event in New York City. So, and that was like very early in my career. So everybody learns as you go along, I guess.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And when people do, and this is maybe more for people who are doing trade shows and things like that in other states, but oftentimes if you are going into a state just for like one single event or for a trade show or something along those lines, you can get a permit to sell just for that small period of time. Oftentimes the event itself will collect tax based on your sales there and remit for you. So something to look into so you don't have to register yourself in that state. And it's meant to kind of, in these kind of situations, avoid a lot of administrative headaches and things. Or partner with a local business as well, who might already be registered, can handle the sales tax there, and then you're essentially a subcontractor. It's also a nice, a good idea to avoid some of that stuff. Still benefit maybe from the tax-free purchasing, wholesale purchasing, and passing it on. So.
All right, thank you.
Great. Okay. Our next question is, what should I add to my contract in regards to postponements and cancellations? This is from Aaron in Minnesota.
Great question. So there are a number of things to consider at this point. And we do actually have COVID protection packages that we put together for people who we work with, so clients and others who we work with, that kind of address all these things. In the instance of a rescheduling, you would need to have a rescheduling addendum. In the instance of a cancellation, you would want to have a cancellation agreement. And then in all documents moving forward, you're going to want to update your contracts with COVID-specific clauses that address a number of things around liability, preparedness, procedures, authority that you have as a vendor. And then in addition to that, you are now, as of some of the new language that came out on Friday, the 12th, although we didn't really find out about it until Monday, but I did have a webinar yesterday for a few hours with around 80 people in the industry to go over it. There's now additional requirements for wedding receptions and events. And so you're going to want to have all of that outlined as well. So there's a significant amount there. I have been doing webinars specifically on those. The content does take a few hours to go over, so I won't kind of dive fully into that right now. But I will put in this chat box a link to the website that has kind of the different packages, so you can see, at least it outlines kind of different documents that you would want to have in place. So if you do have a lawyer you work with, you're welcome to ask them about getting, specific documents drafted. And then otherwise we're happy to help you. And then you can also, attend those other webinars if you would like. Some pretty big issues here are, liability, as far as, if you or your team may happen to be accused of bringing illness on site. That's where you have your different team documents that now need to be implemented prior to events. Other liability here is if you are working with a vendor who may not be following protocol. So the new clarifications that came out on the 12th specifically address venues, caterers, and planners all having specific responsibility for a number of different tasks. And if there is not a if there's not a planner in place, and sometimes florists do double as that, then you would also be assuming some of the responsibility. And it's pretty it's pretty strict. Okay. So under the clarifications, it's that every single person who comes into an event has to first sign and fill out a survey that goes to their symptoms. There have to be set floor plans that delineate people based on people living in the household. This is a state standard at the moment. So this is in Minnesota. However, if you are in Wisconsin, Iowa, I see some South Dakota too, you would want to check, or you're welcome to message me and I can look into it for you as well, but you would want to check on what your state is requiring pursuant to whatever their kind of reopening plans are. But this is state for Minnesota. So there are, really a number of additional requirements that you want to take into consideration. As far as the actual, what you would want to include on a federal level, you can look again at those packages. And I am personally licensed in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois. And then we have people who are licensed in a number of other states as well. So if you, are in another state, you're welcome to send me a message and I can see, what we can do there. But you want to have those waivers in place for your team members. You want to have client waivers. You want to have a document that they're signing, essentially that is fully indemnifying you, releasing liability, saying that they're going to cover you if there is an instance that occurs. Let's say a guest comes after you. And then also acknowledging your authority to enforce and put in place your COVID preparedness plan. I do also want to mention when I say, a dispute or somebody comes after you, I don't necessarily think of that only as a court dispute. There's a lot of disputes that happen before you end up in court. And so these are things that you want to consider in light of, the rogue family member who is threatening to blast you all over social media, the situation in which a, news station decides to dig into the events industry, and also just somebody who is saying we are going to take you to court, but perhaps, you're going to recommend, let's try to mediate this first. Let's, save both of us, the time and expense of a year-long court battle. Let's try to figure out and come to a resolution. So I do think about all of those when thinking about all of the documents that need to be implemented. And I say that like with some hesitation, like it literally hurts my stomach to say that, because anybody who's worked with me knows I'm like a very much less is more person. I don't love having a lot of documents. I think it can get tedious for small businesses, but given the liability here and just the serious potential hiccup it can put in your, already hurting business during this time, to have to fight even a baseless allegation is just not something that many businesses want to take on right now if it can be avoided. Also call your insurance agents and ask them if there's anything additional that can be added to your policy that pertains to the pandemic.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the next question is, are there any specific things we'll need to track differently for COVID-related tax breaks, like the PPP, when it comes time for a tax prep for 2020? This is from Marcy in Iowa.
Yes. Well, we could talk about PPP for a while too. And I noticed that some people had said they haven't yet applied for it. So my first piece of advice is apply for the PPP. If you have been negatively affected by COVID, you have until June 30th to get an application in. Highly recommend it. The new rules that came out over the weekend have made it really, really favorable, especially for sole proprietors. Single member LLCs and single member S Corps can essentially get the entire amount forgiven just based on this owner's pay replacement. Before, you could get a loan based on your profit, and then almost all of it was forgivable. The rest could be used for other qualified expenses such as rent. business utilities like phone and internet. But now they've changed the rules. They've made it a lot more generous. And yeah, essentially, if you are a Schedule C filer, a single member LLC, or a sole proprietor, apply for the PPP loan because it's a tax-free, forgivable loan, essentially. So I'd look into it if your business is negatively affected by Corona. What you need to keep track of for the PPP particularly depends on whether or not you have employees. If you do not have employees, it's quite simple. Again, there is and it's just compensation replacement. So you don't have to have actual wages to have the PPP forgiven based on this. But again, if you are paying business rent for like a studio or a shop, you've got internet, phone, and other business utilities. Those are all expenses to track and pay for with your PPP funds and to have them forgiven. If you have employees, not independent contractors, right? So these are people you give W-2s to at the end of the year. You get to use the PPP funds to pay their wages, health insurance, retirement contributions, even tip replacement if tips are part of their compensation. Again, now you have 24, not just 8 weeks to use the funds. You essentially have till the end of the year. So again, the PPP is looking really, really, really attractive for a lot of people, a lot easier to all be forgiven and so on. So that's the PPP, what to track. There's lots and lots and lots of information. Even a month after opening back up. You mean for the PPP funds? Is that a question for me, Tyler? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So if you apply for the PPP funds and you have plans to reinstate employment, you've got 24 weeks to spend the PPP funds on qualifying expenses. And qualifying expenses are either your own compensation, your employees' compensation, business rent, and utilities. And now it's even easier to get the forgiveness based on payroll. Only 60% of your PPP funds have to be spent on payroll to get the maximum forgiveness. The rest can be spent on rent and utilities, business utilities. So you've got a long runway to spend that money now. And if you don't spend it, it is a loan, so you can pay it back. The loans are also 1% loans, repayable over 5 years. They're really, really great terms. You're not going to find better terms out there in terms of loans. So if you're negatively affected, if you've had contracts down the road in 2020 and 2021 affected, I'd strongly consider applying for it. There are other tax credits as well. If you have employees, there are, sick leave requirements now that you're required to give if you're a business of certain size. I'm guessing most of you are qualifying smaller businesses, so less than 50 employees. But if you're paying sick leave for people who are affected by COVID, either home quarantined, due to stay-at-home orders, they're quarantined because they're sick or showing symptoms, they're caring for a loved one, or if they're caring for a child who has been home because a school or daycare is closed, you're required to pay out, or you're eligible to receive sick pay. If you're self-employed, you can get a tax credit in lieu of those sick pay payments, which you can claim on your 2020 taxes against your 2020 income taxes, federal income and self-employment taxes. So for the sick pay, you have to be, again, showing symptoms or undergoing treatment or seeking treatment or caring for somebody that falls under those things, or have a kid at home because of school or daycare closures. But you can get I think up to 12 weeks of payment. For example, if you've got a kid at home from school that you're caring for, or home from daycare. Again, that will come as a tax credit in the form on your 2020 taxes if you're self-employed. And you should be applying for it with your employer if you're employed by an employer that's offering this. So there's tax credits. Again, for employees, there's also employers. You can also delay your federal payroll tax payments, half of them the employers have, for 2 years. And there's a couple other things like this. But I think for most people, the PPP loan is going to be the biggest save the day measure that's out there. And again, get those applications in if you haven't already applied or received funds, because you have until the end of the month. But I've heard that, after next week, the chances of will kind of go downhill because you've got to get time to get the application in, work with different banks who I'm guessing are going to undergo a deluge of applications with procrastinators. And in light of these new generous rules, more people applying than ever were before. So there is still money out there. So to go to your credit unions, go to your banks. There are online funders. PayPal is offering it. Bluevine is an online fintech company offering it. There's a plethora of options. So I would definitely take a look at it again if you haven't already.
That kind of answers two questions. One was from Shelly in Wisconsin, and she was just asking about paid sick leave, FFCRA, and then she wanted to know what she was missing respect to employees' rights/benefits.
Yeah. There are state level FMLA rules and sick pay rules. Minneapolis and St. Paul, for example, have different rules than the rest of the metro area. In Wisconsin, I have to admit, I'm not an expert on those local rules, so I'd look into those. But most employers, for example, in Minneapolis, I believe if you have really not so many employees, 8 or 10, do you know, Winnie, off the top of your head from Minneapolis? You're required to pay sick pay and offer some of those benefits. Tracking it, if you've got a payroll software, all of the payroll softwares I use for my clients have been really good about adding a pay type for these FMLA sick pay, these corona-related sick pays that are eligible for tax credits and so on. So make sure your payroll is set up appropriately and you're tracking appropriately.
Six or more employees in Minneapolis.
Yeah. Show of hand really quickly. I mean, are you employees or self-employed? Is this a kind of a mix right now? Oh, I suppose I asked 2 questions. No one has that answer. Who's self-employed? a few people. So W-2s, the rest of you for now? Or none of the above?
From what I can tell on here, just from what I know about people, it looks like a lot of them are self-employed.
Okay. And mostly paying other subcontractors, or does anyone raise their hand to have actual other employees? Okay, at least one person has employees. So yeah, if you've got, they've said you do not have to conform to the new federal sick pay rules if you have less than 50 employees, if it's gonna basically put you out of business to pay these people while they're not working for up to 12 weeks. You're exempt. There's an exception for small businesses. I've seen most of my employers kind of falling back on that exception because there's so much uncertainty, you know, what's going to happen over the next 12 weeks and if you're going to pay people and you're not working. But yeah, like I said, there's tax credits when you're self-employed. I won't go too far into these, but for those who do have employees, if you've got questions, please feel free to reach out. I can share my email at the end of this and answer specific questions if you're
I'm late in responding to your first question, but I am an LLC and I do not have any employees, but occasionally I have people helping for a certain event, and I wonder how that should be handled tax-wise.
But they're just subcontractors. You 1099 them?
No, I do not 1099 them. I just have them help and give them some money and let them go on their way.
Okay, so they're not an employee.
No.
So you're not on the hook for any, well, let's say the way you've been paying them are not as employees. Whether they're actual bona fide employees or not is another conversation that we could be having in terms of worker classification. But you don't have anyone working for you right now. So
right. No.
Yeah. So then you don't have to worry about any of these sick pay rules or compensation replacement, anything other than yourself. And that's why, and again, I'd look into the PPP for yourself if you've realized some setbacks due to the corona.
And one thing on the PPP that Beth and I have talked about before with some other groups is, since Beth briefly brought up worker classification there, which, you know, I'm happy to do an entire other webinar on worker classification for the Kohler family. But with PPP, any kind of amount of money that you take from the government right now, whether it's unemployment, PPP, whatever it is, you are likely to get audited in the next few years. in that, if it is PPP and you are saying that a certain amount of those funds are being allocated to your team members, it may also likely trigger a legal audit into your worker classification. And if you have been misclassifying people, then you could end up in a situation, which I have seen a number of local businesses end up in even before this all happened, where they're having to pay back taxes and back wages and other fines that are related to worker misclassification. So just know that that could be coming down the road if you are taking any type of funds. And so now would be a phenomenal time to look at your model and come up with a structure to transition as you move forward into 2021 and kind of get all that stuff buttoned up. But Mary Catherine, maybe we'll make a note to do another webinar, in the near future that addresses worker classification. Okay.
I'm writing it down as we speak.
Okay.
Okay, so
it's a very common issue. So
good. That's good to know. Then we'll definitely have to touch on that. So the next one we have is how to handle clients who may ask for a refund during times of COVID. This is from Megan in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. So many clients asking for refunds right now, especially of everything in full, including the non-refundable deposits. So I've spent quite a bit of time looking into this, as well as talking with a recently retired member of the judiciary, because ultimately we think, okay, if a client pushes this far enough, or if we want to push back far enough, where is this going to end up? It's going to end up in court. And so that's where we look to, is what would a court find? We are in an unprecedented time. The only type of kind of case law that has come down before this that this judge has mentioned to me may pertain is case law in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, which, let's not even get started on, the laws in southern states. It's very significantly different than it is up here, but that is something that they may look to. So when thinking through this, you want to think through what is going to be considered most equitable in the eyes of a standard person. So we know in the industry what we would think would be most equitable. Now you've got, all of these people who aren't in the industry who are saying, absolutely, you have to return the money. You can't perform the services. And even if legally you can, are you really going to force somebody into having a wedding right now if they don't want to have a wedding? So we've got two very starkly different positions on the topic. Now, as far as if a non-refundable deposit can be enforced, at this point, now that weddings can happen again, yeah, it probably can be enforced. The question as to if you do enforce it to its full extent is kind of up to you and the client and how they are likely going to react. We've seen a lot of threats coming out of this, where, bad PR, newspapers and public relations outlets are looking for stories right now that aren't focused on the unfortunate death of George Floyd. And so they're looking for what else they can fill their papers with. And if you look across the country, there have been a number of cases that are coming out, kind of villainizing the event industry for capitalizing on this situation. Now, that's where you want to kind of think about what you're willing to kind of go up against here and how you want to position it. What I have been talking with our clients about, and what I actually believe would probably stand up in court, is, okay, I understand your point. I understand that maybe the services can't be rendered So you're going to cancel. You're not going to reschedule. I get it. My heart goes out to you. Yes. You know what? Let's look at what could be refunded, less the value of the amount of time that I've already put in on this event. And a lot of times that's not going to leave much money to be refunded. And in many cases, they may even owe you more. And then you could be the good guy for like forgiving that extra money, you know? So I think that very often clients don't realize how much time and effort vendors put in before the actual day or before the few days leading up to it. And so if you're able to say, look, industry standard has, florists, if you want us to work, extra hours, kind of, there aren't really hourly for florists, but you could maybe look at a planner. The industry standard has, kind of a sliding scale of, $65 an hour to like $125 an hour. So, if I'm going to give you middle of the line, I'll say, okay, yes, you gave me, a $1,500 deposit. Here are the out-of-pocket expenses that I've already spent that I cannot get back. You are going to be responsible for those. And, I've spent 6 hours talking with you, meeting with you, looking at the venue, conceptualizing, putting together thoughts on what this could look like for you. So I will give you back, the $1,500 less the amount that I've already spent on tangible goods and less the amount of my time valued. That is the approach that I would take rather than coming at it in a combative, like, no, this is what it says, I'm not giving this back to you, because that immediately causes them to clam up and be like, you're not working with me. So there have been a number of vendors who are working with florists in particular that, we've kind of come up with friendly language for. And, if you don't have, let's say you haven't put in a lot of time so far, but you still want to ask them to reconsider, we do have, kind of an email we've put together for that too, that, says like, hey, we get it. We see you, we hear you, we understand you. Here's our situation. Let's work together to come up with a resolution. Happy to give you a credit towards a future date, something like that. So, there are creative ways to do it. I would say, I don't like to have to tell you, like, go talk to a lawyer. With that said, literally every word that you write matters right now. Truly. And so, you don't have to pay a lawyer to draft this stuff for you. Like, you can write it, but I would run it by somebody just to make sure you're not accidentally opening yourself up to liability or some type of commitment that you haven't otherwise intended. I've just spent like 4 hours yesterday backpedaling out of a venue situation because of a word in an email that the client was like hanging on to with their life. So I think you just want to make sure that you're careful there. But at this point, there are no longer governmental restrictions prohibiting a wedding from moving forward. The floral industry has the benefit that even at a tiny wedding, they still need flowers. And so, there is some amount of your service that can be performed. And so it's really coming to an agreement with them that, they'll feel satisfied enough and it protects you. And ultimately you come out kind of looking like probably one of the good guys based on, what other vendors are having to kind of fight against.
Well, I think that's a great segue because the next question was how to continue to book clients during these uncertain times. This person is not finding a lot of clients and they are afraid to book because they don't know if they will be able to have their wedding and they're fearing of losing their deposits. So that is also great.
So first of all, every single vendor countrywide should rewrite their contracts before signing any new clients. really, really important, because this COVID, it is coming back. I mean, we've seen it in what CNN said, 23 of the states today, and that's just this first wave. So like, it's coming back. So rewrite your contracts so that you can protect yourself against it. And that way you can confidently book new clients, knowing that you already have protections in place, so that if it does, when it does come back, if it conflicts with any of the events that you have there, you've already got a crystal clear outline as to exactly how it will be handled. And you won't be going back and forth and having to debate with people on what seems fair, what seems ethical, what seems right. You've made it clear, you know, and they're going into any event knowingly. I mean, another one I was working with yesterday, they want to move their wedding up from the fall to like next week. I mean, it's just, people are all over the place, you know? So it's kind of like, okay, you know, like if you want to do that, just don't hold us responsible. So, you know, I think making sure that you feel confident in that is going to be a good way to go about it. And then finding new clients, super tough right now, to be honest, like industry wide. The upside to floral, again, is that in any instance, you need floral. I mean, I'm a little partial because I started my whole endeavor into wedding world before I became a wedding planner in my former life, working at Arts and Flowers for Steven. And so like, I really love floral. So I feel like you always need it in excess, but you know, everybody needs a bouquet. Everybody needs something, you know? And so I think coming up maybe with some creative marketing opportunities, where you're putting together, you know, some packages, or, you know, doing like a social media type of thing. You could even do some collaboration between florists, you know, where you are joining together with florists who maybe have different styles than you, but you're complementing each other and you're offering packages that way, and just kind of getting the word out there and explaining like why floral is one of the vital vendors. You know, I see that there's been a pretty big campaign right now going around on, man, I'm gonna mess up the actual words, but I think it's like Bakers for Black Lives Matter or something. And it's like all of the bakeries are in on this, all of the different, anybody who makes cookies and cakes and cupcakes and wedding cakes and all this. I think that's what it is. We could check, but they've created a social media campaign that they're all in on together, and they all have this shared mission where they have like a good that you can buy from them, and a portion of it goes to different things. Well, you guys could come up with something like that in the wedding or in the floral industry that maybe pertains to weddings and events, something that, you know, looks like it's kind of giving back to your client base. And that would be a cross promotional opportunity, I think, that you could really capitalize on. And who doesn't like looking at beautiful flowers, you know? And also, while events are down, if you want to kind of bump up your sales with just like arrangements or something, part of the campaign, maybe you could partner with influencers also. And maybe what you could do is like a group of florists every week is like featuring a different floral company. And if you're directing sales there, you're getting cuts. I mean, there's different creative ways that you could do it, but that could be a way that you get broad exposure on social media for doing even, you know, weekly arrangements. Because if you sell a bunch of weekly arrangements, you know, I mean, you could still get some numbers where you're, you know, at least making up some of the lost money from a wedding.
Well, and that's also great, especially if you have the flowers. You have the flowers, you might as well sell them put some money to a good cause. I actually just saw that campaign. I was just looking for it, the Baker's campaign this morning on Facebook feed. I can't find it, obviously, as Facebook always works.
I'll try and find it.
But I'm searching for it, so don't worry. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find another tax question for Beth. Maybe we'll stumble upon one. But the next one is, how can I include language in my floral agreement about rescheduling due to COVID?
It will be a rescheduling clause that you put in there. So again, if you are going to reschedule an event, use a rescheduling addendum. So you can't unilaterally add clauses into contracts that are already in existence. And that's where you kind of want to utilize an addendum so that you can kind of get some other language in there to protect you that may not have been in your original contract. So do use a rescheduling addendum for anything that's in existence. For rewriting your contract for all future clients, there's a number of different clauses that you want to include. And one of them, specifically pertains to rescheduling, cancellation, a kind of revised 2020 version of force majeure, and then also your indemnification and limitation of liability. Those are big clauses that you really want to have in there. We do, in the link that I sent you, as part of the packages, even the base package, I think, has a document with 12 COVID clauses for you to include in your contract. So you can look at that. But you're also welcome to send me an email and ask questions if you have some.
All right. This next question is really broad and general. I don't think she's on, but I'll let you just answer it or, respond. So this person, Ashley from Minnesota, has heard contracts won't protect her. Why is that? And she is an events company, it looks like, or an event florist.
So your contract should be able to protect you to a degree. I don't know if there's any clarification on this, if you want to pop it in the chat or send it to me privately. But the contract should be able to protect you to a degree. First of all, no document is ever bulletproof. If a lawyer tells you that it is, that's false. I will defend that to the ground because that's the nature of law, right? It's the same thing as like in any kind of professional industry. A doctor is never going to tell you, yes, when you have this surgery, nothing can go wrong. I mean, that's just silly. I definitely am the 1 in a million. Everything goes wrong. So like, you just kind of got to roll with it. So, a contract can protect you. Somebody can still sue you if there is a contract, but hopefully your contract can get you out of that lawsuit. They can still kind of go after you publicly if there's a contract, but again, hopefully the language can help clarify that person's maybe just a little aggressive, and that, they're spouting something that may not be completely accurate. Now, there are instances in which your contract the protection that your contract provides might not extend. And that would be, if you're like knowingly or willingly violating regulations or encouraging your client to violate regulations. In that instance, your contract may not protect you, and your insurance will very likely not cover you in the instance of any type of dispute, may even drop you, so I would not recommend knowingly or willingly violating any of the regulations that are in place, no matter how frustrating some of them may seem at this time. I guess it depends on what the concern is, on what it would be protecting, what the concern is around what it's not protecting. But I think that what you would want to do is, if there are specific things that you want to make sure that you're protected against, to talk with an attorney who you feel comfortable talking with about those and how best to defend yourself. I will say a lot of the websites where you can buy forms, the issue there is that even though they might be lawyers who have written the forms, all of the disclaimers are saying in there that this is not legal advice and that you have to take this to a lawyer to get legal advice. You have to have the disclaimer on the forms. That's why we don't have a model where we regularly sell forms. The kind of COVID protection packages we've been doing is a small exception to that. So we have the disclaimers on there, but every single package includes consultation with us so that you're getting that legal advice one-on-one too. Because I think that has been an issue where people buy forms online that are written so generally that they could apply kind of across the country, but they're so general that they don't actually have the protections in them that you would need to implement in your own state, since state law varies so much. But if you're watching, Ashley, and there's something that you are specifically concerned about, feel free to shoot me an email and I'm happy to talk with you about that.
Thank you. Okay, this next question is for Beth, I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong though. Is government relief payment on SBA loan considered an income?
It's a good question. The SBA loan, the PPP loan, is not considered taxable income. So when any kind of debt is forgiven, whether you get a credit card loan forgiven, in this case it is a loan, the PPP, and it's a forgivable loan. Typically that would constitute income, but they are saying it's tax-free. However, the flip side is any expenses that you pay for with PPP, so your employees' salaries, your rent, your utilities, cannot be deducted on your taxes. So in essence, you do kind of end up paying tax on it because the deductions are not deductible, which is why, if at all possible, use as much of the PPP for your own compensation replacement as possible, since you already, as a sole proprietor, cannot deduct your own salary as an expense. So there is some strategy around this. The EIDL loan, if you applied for that, there was an emergency provision, so you were supposed to get $1,000 upfront per employee, even if you just applied. That is also tax-free, but affects how much PPP you can forgive. So let's say you applied for the EIDL, you got $1,000. By the way, if you got a mystery deposit in your account that said SBA Treasury, $1,000, that's what that's from, applying for the EIDL. That you'll have to subtract from your PPP loan forgiveness calculation. So basically you can't get the same $1,000 forgiven twice. So that's how that plays in. But the EIDL is a loan that is paid back. It's paid back, so it's not taxable income either. Unemployment though, and the CARES Act unemployment, that will be taxable income. And as far as I know, you cannot have taxes withheld on that extra $600 a week if you've been getting unemployment at this time. So keep that in mind, that it will be taxable income to you. One quick note on how PPP and unemployment play together. So PPP is meant to be compensation replacement. If you are on unemployment, you are getting benefits because you are not receiving any compensation. Therefore, if you get the PPP, you have compensation, which means you should be reporting it for unemployment purposes, if that makes sense. If you already received your PPP loan, it was based on an 8-week period. Initial guidance said split your PPP out over 8 weeks and report it each week ratably to unemployment. Now, where you can stretch it out over 24 weeks, it's based on 2.5 months of payroll. So we're calculating claim your PPP over about 11 weeks of unemployment benefits. And they further said that, or they haven't specified rather, what that 11-week period needs to be. So since everyone is getting this extra $600 CARES payment through the end of July, we're advising people to wait until the end of July to start issuing themselves PPP paychecks. so that you can maximize your unemployment benefits and then start drawing on your PPP and claiming the income there. So there are a bunch of moving parts here. Unemployment, I think, is a totally viable thing for most people right now if your income has dropped or your work has dropped below 32 hours. Just keep in mind if you are getting the PPP funds, that you'll have to keep it in, you'll have to lower or maybe even forego your unemployment benefits that week because of the PPP you received. A lot of people then ask, well, what's better? Well, the PPP is not taxable money. Unemployment is. So even for a few weeks, if you have to forego unemployment, you are replacing tax-free money for taxable money. So dollar for dollar, I do think a PPP loan is better than unemployment if you had to choose between the two. But again, now that we have a lot of flexibility, get your unemployment, ride out this extra CARES Act to the end of July, and then maybe at that point start claiming your PPP payments. We're seeing that's kind of the best case scenario for especially self-employed people, single member LLCs and single member sole proprietor, single member S corps. Thank you. Yeah. Don't know if that answers the question. Does anyone else have any questions on unemployment or PPP? I have to actually jump off the call in about 15 minutes, so I want to make sure if anything sparked up after I talked about a couple of these things, that I have a chance to field those, and then Winnie can take over for the rest.
There is one question about how grants and unemployment and PPP will affect them, and it's just like kind of a general question.
Well, I think what I was just getting at maybe kind of touched on that, hopefully. I think the big thing to keep in mind is these grants, like a state grant. Yeah, I guess PPP is not the only grant right now. There's disaster recovery loans at the state, county. Women Venture is offering, some nonprofit organizations are offering. So some of them say if you get this loan, or if you've been eligible or you've received other disaster recovery funding, you're not eligible for other loans. So be very careful about what you're agreeing to when you're signing those promissory notes and agreements for any kind of loans or grants, because one may negate your ability to get another, or might even accelerate repayment of a loan. So make sure you're following loan terms. I had a client who just applied for a lot and then got a lot of money. And then we found that, okay, you actually can't receive this money because of this. And then we had to choose what was the best money, cheapest overall. PPP was at the top, and then so on. So, yep. Again, a lot of moving parts. Be aware of what you've applied for. I'm finding most people are getting a combination of both the PPP and unemployment. And that's working out for a lot of people because they've expanded those benefits so much.
Are there any tax write-offs specifically for contractors?
For contractors? I mean,
during like the COVID epidemic.
Well, you cannot include their payments for any of the PPP. Like they're not considered compensation. So you can pay them, of course, but you cannot use their wages to get the loan forgiven. And that's because your contractors are eligible to get PPP funds of their own. So everyone who's self-employed is eligible to apply for their own loans. You cannot use other self-employed people's income to get your own loan forgiven. It's different with some of these other grants. Certainly if you apply for a grant, just a regular operational grant, you could use that money to pay your subcontractors, I assume, but you'll have to look at the small print for each of those loans and grants and see if there's any restrictions on what you can spend on that. Each one I found to be pretty different. But other than that, no other write-offs other than, tracking their wages, writing them off on your taxes. Make sure you file the 1099s and so on.
From all the questions I'm looking at, it looks like we've covered most of them tax-wise. So if anyone has any other questions, like raise your hand with the button. I know that some people are on the phone, so they might not be able to do that.
Okay, well, I'm just pop my email address into the chat, and it's just for anyone on the phone or not on the webinar. It's beth@foxtaxservice.com, and feel free to shoot me an email, or you can even route it through Mary Catherine, and she can get me the email, or Winnie as well. And I can try my best to send you resources. Fox Tax also has a lot of great archived newsletters. We've been sending out our top 3 questions of the week, and we've got a lot of information that we've been trying to dissect and then push out in readable forms. So that's another really great resource, I think. We've got some loan calculators, forgiveness calculators, more information on how unemployment and PPP work together. And then there's a lot of information out there, and it's changing very rapidly as well. So take your time. Talk to your bankers. They are ultimately the ones, in the case of a PPP, who will be responsible for applying for the forgiveness and you filling out the application. So they're a great resource as well. Unemployment, if you can get through, is a great resource as well. And like I said, feel free to email me. I've got to jump out to help my husband's pop-up restaurant tonight. But thank you again for all having me, and feel free to reach out if you have questions.
Thank you, Beth.
Hi, guys.
Thank you for joining.
Thanks. Ciao. Next time.
Okay, great. Well, we're just going to keep going, all right?
All right. Yeah.
What constitutes a full-time equivalent employee? This is from someone in South Dakota.
So, well, let's see. Usually here it is 40 hours a week. Let me look at what South Dakota is. My guess is that it is usually it's federal. However, states can change things a little bit. But yeah, okay. So it actually has here full-time employee average of 30 hours a week in South Dakota. But I don't know that that is actually when overtime would kick in, to be honest. So let's just see here quickly. Why don't you, I have, whomever it was that asked that, I'm sure that I have your contact information on here. I want to see whether or not that's been affected at all due to COVID. So I'm going to put that on my list to just look at today in our databases, and then circle back with you on that. So let me just make a note here. South Dakota full-time. And I'm guessing you're just wondering what defines full-time employment in South Dakota. So that's what I will look at, and then I'll send you an email, and if it's something else, then we can go from there.
Perfect. I think because their follow-up question is, what is the liability if someone who is working gets COVID? So I'm guessing if they are considered a full-time employee, what is their what is the liability for that person?
Yeah. So as far as like COVID and your worker team, there are all sorts of different things that you need to be considering. Let me just pull up our employment worker package here, just so we can kind of look at this. So first of all, I want to be clear that when I use the word employee, I mean a legally classified employee, not a contractor, not an intern, but a legally classified employee. There are differences as to what you can require of them. And it is really, really important in your documentation that if they are not, in fact, a legally defined employee, that you do not refer to them as an employee, because if you are audited and you have referred to them as such, that can also trigger back taxes and back wages, even if they say, no, I'm a contractor. There have still been recent penalties assessed to companies who have treated people like employees who are not, in fact, being paid like employees. So just before I dive into this, I just wanted to classify that. Okay, so with your worker team, there's a few different things that you want to have in place. And there's, I'm just going to go through with you guys. I know we're tight-ish on time. I'm going to go through with you guys kind of the basics of what we have outlined in our protection plan, just because it's pretty comprehensive. But if you have specific questions, we can address those as well. So first of all, as a business in general, to help prevent against claims like negligence by a client, or there's always that like rogue mother of the bride. So to prevent against claims in that situation, you want to have not only the COVID preparedness plan that's required now, at least in Minnesota, it's required. For those of you who are out of state, it may not be required. But in Minnesota, it is required that it be in place by June 29th. And actually for venues and planners, it has to actually be posted at the event now so that everybody can see it. But you do want to have that on record. We have been working on one that can be a pretty thorough base for those in the event industry, and it's going to be posted to the Minnesota Events Coalition website by next week. So you can kind of look at that if you need to pull a base that's been written for the events industry. You also want to have in there a business continuity plan. This is really important for florists in particular, because each of you are artists and people hire you based on your artistic talent and the talent of your team. And that is not to say that, other people on your team aren't talented or aren't as equally talented, but people form connections with their florists and they trust them because flowers are an investment. We know why they are. A lot of people in the general public don't always necessarily understand the expense associated with floral, and people trust your vision, so like, for example, even though I know that everybody at Arts and Flowers is incredibly talented, every time I call, I'm like, hey, can this go to Steven? Because I know Steven and I'm like, I trust him and he's going to know what I like. And that is something that is special to each and every florist out there. So if you are to get sick, or you are to be, out of commission, maybe, a spouse or a child, or, somebody who you are a caretaker for gets sick and you need to be dedicated to that, you want to have this business continuity plan in place to delegate who the work goes to and who is in charge. This is going to allow protection in the instance of you get sick, you can't do the floral for a wedding, you call a friend does the floral, everything seems to go fine. 3 weeks later, you get some angry email from, I'm just going to use Mother of the Bride because they send them a lot, from Mother of the Bride saying, these were fine, but they weren't your work and we want money back. That should not be something that you have to deal with. But so a business continuity plan is going to protect in that situation to say, this was our plan. This is in place internally. You still were given your product. It was still of quality work. And it just protects against any negligence claims. Okay, so that is internally in your business, and that should be shared with your team so that they are aware of how to implement it if and when that, rare situation needs to be implemented. The next is going to be, disclosure to a client. Now, you aren't legally obligated to disclose to a client if somebody on your team has in fact gotten COVID. With that said, you think about it again from the PR perspective of things. Okay, so you think about like, all right, there's going to be, from what we know, from what the governor's office has told us, we know that there's going to be contact tracing if somebody at an event gets COVID. Now, let's say somebody on your team gets COVID and at the hospital, they're like, yeah, here, I worked on a wedding, these dates, these times. Then they're going to do contact tracing there. And you think about the perspective of, if I were my client, would I want to find out from my florist, hey, I really don't think that there should be an issue, but I wanted to let you know somebody did test positive for COVID. None of the rest of us have, but we wanted to inform you so that you could take whatever measures you wanted to take, versus like a letter from the government saying one of your wedding vendors tested positive for COVID. You should all go get tested immediately because you could die. I mean, it's like, you know, I would prefer to get a notice from my vendor and like, I'd probably want to send them their own flowers, you know, so that they get better. Right. Like you just don't know what the government is going to say in these letters. And so it's just kind of like a PR measure there, but there's no legal obligation. Your preparedness plan, we talked about that. Okay, anybody who is a contractor who is working with you, or an intern, or, you know, if you just have extra hands from a family member, anybody who is working for you, before each event, they should be signing a release that says, you know, we're in this time of COVID. Here are the precautions we're taking. Regardless of the precautions, if you come to this event, you could end up getting COVID. If you do get COVID, it is not our fault, right? So that's like the general gist of that release, and that you want to have that signed before every event. You also are going to want to have them sign a personal statement. And again, all of this is, I'm just walking you through like everything that's in this package, just because it's comprehensive. You may not choose to implement all of this stuff, and that's fine, but I'm just kind of giving you the overview. So then the personal statement of any person working on behalf of you. And this is a statement that they're writing to you, and it's already pre-written. They sign it, that says they understand what's going on, and that they are telling you that they have not been symptomatic in the last, 15 days. We say 15 because we just give it that extra, 24 hours, and that they have not been in contact with somebody who is symptomatic. And then there's also a temperature waiver. Now, these documents are incredibly important to prevent, or to help prevent liability. Nothing is guaranteed, but to help prevent liability in the instance of, a negligence claim, or somebody comes after you and says, you got us sick. This shows that you took reasonable care to check in with your team to make sure that nobody who was symptomatic was going around all of these other people. Now, here's something to note. All of these various documents that pertain to an individual's health or their interaction with COVID need to be kept in a separate confidential file, other than any standard personnel file or other file that may be in your, proverbial file cabinet, whether it's online or in person or like physical, and needs to be marked confidential and only shared with those who absolutely need to see it. So in almost every instance, that's going to be the employer. If you're an employee, you want to make sure that your employer is keeping all of this in a different file that is marked confidential and only pertains to your medical information. The reason for this is there are different instances in which personnel files can be accessed. And this is not information that would need to readily be accessed on a regular basis by all of those who could have access to a personnel file. And so you're taking that extra level of precaution, even though this isn't like really disclosing much medical information, it's disclosing enough. And so you want to make sure that it is protected and you are taking those precautions. Okay, then if you do have employees or you are an employee, there is actually a new employees' rights poster that needs to go up. You can get this online for free. If you don't have a physical location or you aren't in a physical location right now where employees regularly come, you could send this to them virtually, put it in a Google Doc that everybody can access or whatever, but you want to make sure that they have this new poster so that you can say that you took proper steps. All right, and then the last thing, but this is like a pretty comprehensive one as well, are the, and if you see me reading, it's because I'm looking at all the documents, but are the actual clauses that should either be they're not legally required to be included, but best practices for protecting you against, inevitable issues in the future, should either be added to the employee handbook if you are an employer and you have a handbook, or if you're working with contractors, interns, extra hands. You'll note I don't call them volunteers because technically under the law, you're not allowed to have volunteers unless you're a 501c3 organization. So that's why I'm calling them extra hands for now. But if you were to put a COVID policy document in place for your team, for your worker team. Okay, so here is where you're going to consider, making sure that in that document you have language that addresses that, the policies are evolving and that you have the right to implement new policies, as legislation evolves, medicine evolves, the law evolves. Just gives you the right to continue to update things without having to obligate you to anything further. This comes into play a little bit because there are certain things in Minnesota that cannot be implemented for existing employees without further consideration, which means like a bonus or a raise, such as like a non-compete agreement that cannot be implemented against somebody who is already employed unless you offer them something additional. Also, a note on non-compete agreements. They typically are not enforceable against independent contractors in the state of Minnesota or extra hands. They're only enforceable against employees. So just make note of that. So anyway, evolving policies language. You probably want to have some meeting where you go over new COVID policies and make note of when you had the meeting and who was there. This is to help avoid in a situation in the future where somebody says, I didn't know about that new policy. And you're like, you were at that meeting. It's not my fault. You were zoning out, or watching like Hulu on the side of your screen. So that's where you want to make sure that you have that in writing. Offering regular team check-ins or a process that people can regularly check in. Should the language say COVID-19 or can it be more general? I will get into that, but what I typically would say here is COVID-19 or any influenza-like illness. Because influenza-like illness is pretty all-encompassing, but influenza is and can be as infectious as COVID-19, and we don't know what's going to kind of evolve out of all of this since it is such a new disease. So that gives you kind of an overarching language there. So it is important to have the accessibility for a regular team check-in, and this is going to help with also the inevitable down the line, complaints about employers or businesses not being accessible, not being open, feeling stressed out, like you don't feel like you have anybody you can go in and talk to, because there will be those claims, there already have been. Workplace illness, having a policy in place that if somebody is exhibiting symptoms that they will be, sent home, that anybody who has been in close contact with them would be sent home. This is not, you're not being reprimanded, but you're looking out for public policy and health concerns. And you list in here the different symptoms, that the CDC is currently considering. And I realize I'm flying through these. This is literally like a 13-page document of additional COVID clauses and policies to consider. So that's why I'm just kind of like going through it quickly so I don't go into crazy detail and overwhelm you guys more than this probably already is. So you do want to have that in place. It allows you to have something to easily reference if there is a situation in which you need to implement it. Always better right now, given the incredible heightened emotions that are going on, to have something on paper that you can say like, no, this isn't me. This isn't against you. This is just our policy. It's being implemented with everybody. Yes, this info, yep, it is available. Yep. So through that link that I sent you, you can find it there, or you can shoot me an email and we can talk through it also. Okay, so what happens if an employee refuses to return to work? That is, yes, I will send the link again. So if they refuse to return to work, this has been a big one lately for employees, for workers, like interns and contractors. So there's technically the only reason that they can refuse to return to work is if they believe that they are in imminent danger. And imminent danger includes any conditions or, any conditions or practices in any place of employment which are such that a danger exists which can reasonably be expected to cause death or serious physical harm immediately. So I actually talked with an employment specialist about this the other day for a gym that was calling back their personal trainers. And the personal trainer said, no, I want to keep doing this via Zoom. I have kids. I don't want to bring my kid germs into the facility where we provide instruction for people over the age of 65. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, depending on how you're looking at it, but that instance, it does not qualify. So if they choose not to return to work, they could be terminated for insubordination based on that. Now, again, there's always this PR perspective, right? I mean, we saw the way that the internet blew up right after George Floyd's death with people saying, I'm quitting because my employer is not supportive of Black Lives Matter or something like that. I mean, it was everywhere, like Bon Appetit magazine, Facebook. I mean, all over Starbucks. Massive companies. Yeah, Starbucks, like massive companies. And you don't want to deal with that. That's not good for a small business. And so figuring out a way in which you can try to work with them within reason is probably an approach that I would suggest taking. But it can also be, you're kind of figuring out a policy that you would have in place. But if you have somebody who's maybe high risk or something like that, then you can talk about certain accommodations. Self-reporting, requiring self-reporting so that you know if your staff is sick. That's pretty important one. Workplace testing. So right now, yes, the password, here we go. COVID. And if you're looking like, let's say you look at the different package options through that link, and there's like, you're like, okay, well, I don't need all of this. I just need one thing or another thing. The packages are priced to be like super affordable compared to one-off documents. But if there is a one-off document that you prefer, like shoot me an email and we can talk about that. Workplace testing. Okay, so you are allowed to do workplace testing. Right now, there aren't enough accurate and reliable immediate tests that would like make this feasible. But I could definitely see a situation in which like next spring, there is a kind of quick response test that can be self-administered or administered by an individual. And I could see that being the norm in the wedding industry, right? Because events are inherently, by their size, more susceptible to becoming kind of a hot spot. And so it could become an industry norm that, there are tests administered before an event over the size of whatever, X number of people. So you have this language in there to allow for that. It also allows for temperatures to be taken. That seems to be a pretty standard across the board. If there's client interaction, client interaction, then there are temperatures being taken. Okay, we'll take a quick breather here. A question about federal paid sick leave or those quarantined by health officials. So is the question here, if you are considered sick, do you have to pay them? Is that the question?
I'm muted.
Yeah.
It is Shelley's question. It is from the FFCRA. So we
Okay.
kind of touched on this in the beginning a little bit.
Yep. This is going to depend in part on the size of your business. Let's see. I'm just looking here to see if there's a quick answer. Do we know the average size of the business, Mary Catherine, on what we're 6 here? Okay. Federal program that pays employees who are out 6 FTE. I think I can hear somebody talking, but I can't hear much. See here.
6 full-time employees.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay, that's Minneapolis paid sick leave though. That's not federal. So that would apply
And
to
I know that Shelley is in Hudson, Wisconsin.
Oh, okay. So Shelley, if you're in Hudson, I'm going to circle back with you on that. I'm going to make a note of it because I want to check on what Hudson is right now. So I will get back to you today on that question. Okay. Just because there's some new policies in place because of this, but I will check on that. 6 full-time paid sick. Okay. Yes, I will send you an email later today on that. All right. So, masks in the workplace. Currently in Minnesota, if you're working at an event, you are required to wear masks. So that is something that you might want to have in place in writing. Again, whether or not, you end up having somebody who kind of fights back against it, that's its own thing, but you want to have in writing what you are asking of them. If they do have a medical reason why they can't wear a mask, then there's procedures you can follow for that. Letting them know that you do have to report if they contract COVID while they are on the job. You don't need to report if they contract like the flu, if they're on the job, but COVID in particular right now because of contact tracing. A medical file, as we discussed, talking about the sanitation measures that you're taking, talking about guest and client interaction, that it would not be appropriate to ask a guest at a wedding, do you have COVID? But how you would handle that kind of situation. And then with rehiring and hiring screening, in normal worlds, you would never, ever ask anybody about their medical history, like ever. Now you are allowed to ask them about COVID, exposure to COVID, symptoms of COVID. And you would do that after making a conditional job offer to them. So this is something that you would, you could use with interns, contractors, or employees. You'd make a conditional job offer, then you could ask them about this. And then you could say, great, we would love to have you. Since you have been exposed to COVID or may have been exposed to COVID in the last, 14 days, we are going to ask you to wait to start until that has passed. If, time is of the essence, like you needed them for extra hands for a wedding this weekend, you would be allowed to pull the job offer in that situation. Childcare, not offering childcare on site if you're not licensed to do so. Travel, if you have any policies around travel, if they've been traveling and then you don't want them to quarantine for a certain amount of time, they're making an informed decision to travel at that point. Remote work procedures, this may come into effect less as far as communication goes, but let's say that you have, somebody who's designing floral at their home or something like that. You may want to have policies in place that address the conditions in which they're keeping the florals, so you don't end up, giving them like, $500 worth of product, and then, they aren't taking the precautions to keep it properly refrigerated or something, and then the product goes bad, and then you have to get new product. You want to make sure that they're following policies in place so that you aren't jeopardizing your investment on that end. And then obviously an acknowledgement form as well. So that's kind of everything as it pertains to your team and bringing people back. It's an insane amount of information. I fully acknowledge that. So if you need to process and ask questions later, that is fine as well. Okay.
And then that link, can we send that out with the replay link as well?
Yeah. Yeah,
Perfect.
Of course. Yeah, not a problem.
Great. And then we know that everyone has it.
Yes.
Because that is a lot of information.
It is a lot of information.
But
and
it's all really, really good.
It is. And Shelley, I will follow up with you as well as it pertains to the Hudson and Wisconsin rules there.
Okay.
And South Dakota full-time. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, South Dakota full-time. Shelley says thank you. Perfect. Another question we have is, if the state doesn't allow an event to be held, does it nullify a wedding vendor contract?
Yeah, so this is where you're getting into the common claims that are kind of coming up with clients as far as frustration of purpose, impossibility, and impracticability. Those are three kind of legal terms. And if an event is not allowed to go forward because of a governmental restriction, that would probably fall under the realm of impossibility to perform, and likely you would not be able to enforce the contractual terms against them, and they also would not be able to enforce against you. In that instance, to protect yourself, that's where you could try to negotiate, what you are returning of any deposit that's been paid, and then also make sure that they're signing a cancellation agreement.
Okay, great. On that note, should they have separate contracts for couples who split their event into 2 dates? So the ceremony may be smaller in 2020, and then maybe the reception is in 2021.
So if that is going to be like if that's a reschedule situation, you could outline that in the rescheduling addendum. You could outline kind of the terms of that and what that looks like. If it is a new contract, you don't you don't need to have 2 different contracts, but you would outline both events in the same contract. So you would just like kind of where you're putting the event information, you would just put both events in there. And I should also say there will be instances in which this has already occurred, and that's why I say there will be instances in which a client says, I am 100% going forward with this event. I do not care what you say. It is happening. I am doing it. And vendor says, man, I am not comfortable with that. Either I don't want to jeopardize my own business by violating the laws, or maybe I am a high risk person and you're having a few 100-person event, or like I live with a high risk, whatever it is, there will be that situation. And a client may say, fine, then you're canceling the agreement, give us back all our money. Depending on the way that your original agreement was written, you could assign the contract to another vendor of your equal quality and, close price range and choosing. And in that instance, you would do an assignment addendum, and that is actually for the template of it, although you want to specialize it and put in your personal information and maybe make adjustments to your business. That is a free download on our website right now. But do ask me questions about it if you do download it, and you want to make it personal to your business. In that instance, that kind of allows you to, call upon your other vendor community and say, hey, vendor community, I'm not comfortable doing this for these reasons. Is there somebody else who's available to take this on? I'd be happy to assign this contract to you and to give you the remaining payments due under this contract. And then you sign that addendum because it releases you from liability and it transfers the contract to that other person who's stepping in.
Wow, that's great and really brilliant. So thank you. Another question is, do you charge for a cancellation amount if they cut down the budget due to COVID? So we are seeing a lot of like big weddings go down from like $1,000 to $2,000 budget to, I don't know, 200.
So it will depend in part on what your contract has said. In that instance, I would think about what would be considered equitable if this were to end up in small claims court. And I think it's really tough, right? Because, basically at contract law, you may be able to, however, the equitable side of it, it's very likely that a court would say, let's work together here. Let's be reasonable. What can you cut it down to that you're still comfortable with, that will still cover your fees and that will still cover your time and cover your costs. So we'll probably cut it down a little bit, but maybe not, slash it entirely. That is an amendment that I would also make when you guys are going back and redoing your contracts moving forward. I would line item out an hourly rate that you charge for consulting and for design time, so that in instances in which people say, I don't believe you. You can't charge me that much. That's insane. You can say, no, look, like this is my hourly rate. And I can either, stick with this kind of flat fee that we've estimated for you, or we can choose an hourly rate. It's up to you. This is your decision. It's in your hands. I'm trying to offer you some different equitable options that are going to, cover our costs, while also taking into consideration, a financial strain that you might be under. And, here are a number of options we're considering, or we're offering to you. Because that's really the main thing here is what would be seen as equitable, what is still going to cover you, and have you made an effort to be nice and offer different options. That's kind of the key thing that somebody would look at here. And that's, because pretty much anything can be public. I mean, there is, it's already been on radio stations here locally where, brides are calling in to the radio stations and saying, I can't believe that these vendors aren't going to give me back anything. My day is ruined. I've been dreaming of this my whole life, and now I can't have anything. And then all of a sudden the vendors are villainized without even stopping to think about the fact that, this is putting a significant strain on the event industry as well.
Yeah, everyone's interconnected. So it's hard because no one wants to lose money, but also people need to buy groceries.
Yeah.
And cover costs.
Yeah. And I should say for rescheduling also, or for people have asked me, like, is rescheduling fee okay? Due to the lost opportunity of a potential other event next year. In speaking with the judges, they would not find much viability in that argument, because their perspective on it is your event is getting rescheduled. So it is still happening. You may lose a future event, but your potential future loss is every other small business's current loss. And that's kind of the way that they're looking at that. Now, there are significant strains put on the event industry now as to expectations for sanitization, maybe having to have extra hands on deck. Additional rentals is going to be a huge thing for tables at for tables at events now. First of all, everybody needs to be seated for ceremony, cocktail hour, and reception now. And as far as tables go, you can only have a maximum of 4 unrelated people, 4 people who do not live together at a table. If they do live together, you can only have 6. So like table numbers are going to double, right? Because you go from a 72-inch round where you can have 8 to 10 people to now all of a sudden, okay, you have 4, maybe 6, and that's only if they're all in the same household can it be 6. So most of the time it's 4. So there are going to be added expenses. There's going to be significantly more labor. So if you can kind of show, yes, depends on the state. Yes, thank you. Depends on the state. So that's Minnesota. But you can look at that to see what it is in your state, or, you know, if you want, there aren't many states on here. It's all Iowa. Let's see, we have Indiana, Iowa, South Dakota, Wisconsin. I could have my associate look at kind of what those rules are in those states as well, if you don't already know. But you could be in a situation in which your work, your time, your expenses are going up. And so you may be in a position where you have to talk with your couple about, there are a lot more expenses. This is not a rescheduling fee, but these are fixed expenses that we have to face in order to still execute your event. And that's going to be a decision for them to make as to whether or not they want to assume those additional fixed expenses. There's no reason that you should have to take on that added expense. They may just have to reconceptualize a few things.
All right. Well, that was also really helpful. And I mean, the thing of it is that if you have to pay $2,000 worth of flowers, and that's the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
So helping them reimagine it, I think, is a really great idea as well. Because they could donate those flowers too. They could, you know, relatives or grandparents or people who are, you know, going through it right now. There are ways of giving back that I have seen on social media and all that. And then also going back to that, the bakers comment that you guys were talking about, it's called Bakers Against Racism. So this, and it's on Instagram, but they're doing a lot of pieces on it right now.
And it's gotten a lot of traction.
Yeah.
So if there's a way like to come up with some type of marketing campaign for the floral industry, that would probably be pretty great. And I think that you can come up with, it's totally dependent on you guys. I will say that there are, you know, bakers who are posting that and who are getting backlash saying like, you know, I saw somebody's post was like, I don't want my cupcakes with a side of telling me I shouldn't be racist. And it's like, okay, well, okay. Like, you know, in that instance, like, I think the baker chose to say like, goodbye, you know, but like, it just depends, you know, you might end up with that. So it comes with whatever messaging collectively you guys feel comfortable with taking on.
Yes. We have, it looks about 10-ish minutes left. Do you want to open it up to
any questions?
Anyone here that has any like burning questions that we haven't touched upon? We're just going to open it up.
And I also realize, you guys, this is so much information. I mean, I've been doing a webinar pretty much almost every single day. So because there is just so much information. So if you need to process and think, you know, I'm happy to do, you know, another collective group call next week. I know Beth and I do have another one scheduled next Thursday that you're welcome to join in on. That one's through Springboard for the Arts. So it's kind of open, but if you guys want to do something again, we can absolutely do that. And then also through the link, there's like multiple other webinars that are specific event industry too. So
yeah, and if you want to shoot those over to us too, we can try and help everyone get all that information as well.
We can do that. Okay, see a question coming in from Shelley. Trade retail florist, okay. Oh, which package do you recommend? Do you have a team of employees, or do you have a team of workers who work for you, Shelley?
She has 6 full-time employees.
Oh yeah, she's the 6 full-time employee person. Okay, and in Wisconsin, and does have a wedding contract. I would say either it depends on what your concern is. If your concern is with workers, you could go the worker route. If it is with employee handbook. So you could either go the worker route, or if you have also concerns about the client side of things, then there is a combo package on there that offers even more savings that I put together yesterday for a few of the venues and larger vendors here. And that would be an option as well that covers client side and internal operations. And Shelley, because you're in Wisconsin, it'll be great that during the review of that information with you, we can make adjustments and tailor to Wisconsin based on whatever the policies are that may be different depending on Wisconsin law right now. Yeah, you bet. Do you have a link for the Minnesota regulations? Yes, let's see here. Who did I just send these to? Let me just look here. I just sent those to somebody, all the links to somebody yesterday here. Okay, so there's so much to learn. Okay, so here are the 2 executive orders that we've been referencing. 1, 2, there should be 2 different links. And then in addition, there's another, sorry, I'm just trying to remember who I sent this to. I have a 3-month-old and an 18-month-old, and got out of the hospital like 3 days before COVID hit. And so I haven't taken any time off of work, and to manage with the boys, I've been, because the newborn has respiratory stuff, I've been working from 4 in the morning until 9, and then from 7 at night until like 2 in the morning. And so I don't always remember who I'm emailing when, to be fair.
You need a break. Oh my gosh.
There's always a light at the end of the tunnel. It's just like a little bit of madness at the moment. And I don't drink caffeine, which I don't know, that might have to change, to be honest.
I don't drink caffeine either. Okay. We are on the same wavelength.
Yes, we are. There's one other document that I'm just trying to find for you here. Let's see, Laura. It's another one that was sent to us by the government. Here's another one. Here we go. From governor's office, I should say. So that's industry specific. So that's gonna also, and this is Minnesota again, but if you need information from other states, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll put my email here, and then I can gather that for you as well, or have Brooke send that over. And it has been clarified, I should say this, it has been clarified that now, somebody literally just texted me, I'm looking for a good florist. Anyway, lots of good florists in Minnesota. Broad
They're
question.
everywhere.
Yeah, that's a broad question. I should clarify that it previously was understood that there were to not be any private home or residential weddings or events, at least in Minnesota, anytime in the near future. That is no longer the case so long as they do have, you know, a planner or caterer or some type of formal vendor structure in place. They would now be subject to the same rules that the rest of these wedding receptions are subject to.
And do the guests, I can't remember if you said this or not, but do the guests also sign a waiver?
Yeah, so the guests now are going to have to sign, they have to fill out a checklist about their symptoms as they attend. And let me see here, that is also provided by, a sample of it's provided by the government. You may or may not wish to have your own checklist that you do like on an iPad or something, so that you can get like their first initial and last name or something, so that you can show that you actually did it for every guest.
Sure.
But here are at least the questions to ask. Is there specific info for florists? So that information that I shared with you applies to all wedding and event industry vendors. And then there's also going to be, on that last link, there'll be regulations that pertain to retail and storefront as well. So it'll be kind of two factors of your business are going to probably have different rules that they have to abide by.
And then are you also available, like, do you keep that copy, or does the bride and groom, like if it's a home wedding, right, and you have 25 people there and they all sign that they don't have COVID and all that jazz, who ends up with those documents?
I would keep that. So if it were me, I would create a spreadsheet that I use. Maybe it's a Google Doc so that you can use it at every single event. And I would have a column for like first initial, last name, and then a column for each of these questions with a checkbox. And I would personally keep a copy of that, because if there's contact tracing and they come back to you as the vendor to see whether or not you complied with the regulations, you want to be able to show that you in fact did. And me, just being a lawyer, I just wouldn't trust anybody else to hang on to it. So that is what I would do. Again, keep it confidential. You may have guests that are like, I don't want to give you my first and last name. That's okay. You know, then in that situation, just, or first initial, last name, that's okay. Just put, you know, Jane Doe, and, you know, you could, for your own notes, you could put a description of them, like lady in the blue dress. So when you have looking back through pictures, you know, you can be like, no, I got her information. She just didn't want to give me her name. That's okay. Right. You know, you can respect that because of privacy and things like that, but just have indicators so that you can show that you complied.
Perfect.
And that's really, you know, obviously not every single vendor needs to do that. It's whichever vendor is in charge of doing that at an event.
Right. So if you have an event planner, they might be the ones who are doing that for everyone.
Or a venue. Yep. Or venue.
Yeah. Can you then, as a florist, can you request like a copy of those from a vendor if something ends up happening to you or your business?
Yeah, you could. Oh yeah, that was the other document that I was gonna say. It's not actually on the website yet. I'm sending, because I was finishing it today, but I'm sending it to everybody who already has these packages. But this is another document that you may see pop up, and if you do see it pop up, it's probably because I recommend to do it. But because of the new language, because that puts so much liability, like explicit liability, on certain vendors, that there should be an agreement between vendors that they're representing to each other that they are following and abiding by, you know, COVID policies and regulations. And that's more to protect yourself, because, I mean, I hear it all, no judgment. I understand businesses are everybody's trying to navigate this and do the best that they can do. But, you know, it has come to my attention that there are a few vendors who are, have been stressed out because a few other vendors are essentially saying, I'm not doing anything. I don't care. Not my problem. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to take any precautions. And that is significantly concerning to some other vendors because of the liability, I think, but also just due to their own health and safety. And so having that document that you're signing, you know, with really, it would be kind of like with the venue and with the planner, kind of the main people who are coordinating everything. Or if you as the florist are kind of the point of contact for whomever is on site that day, maybe if it's at a private home wedding, you would just want people to sign that because that's going to help hold each other accountable as well.
Right. Well, I know it's 11. It's 11:01.
Okay.
I don't want to go over time because you're busy.
That's okay. It's okay.
I want
it's
you
my
to
pleasure.
get like a nap or some food. You know.
I've been eating a lot of goldfish and Teddy Grahams. Like
Okay, great.
that's my diet these days. Well, it's been a pleasure, you guys. And if anything comes up, please feel free to shoot me an email. And then, you know, Mary Catherine, if you decide that, you know, we should do another in the future, or you guys want to talk through anything else, send Mary Catherine an email, and I am always happy to talk with florists. So
thank you
right,
so
guys,
much.
yeah.
Yes, everyone, let us know if you need anything, what other webinars you'd love to see. Even if it's not law related, let us know. We want to know. We're here to support you guys. So thank you all for coming.
All right. Have a good day, guys. Bye.